We're really happy.
All right, commissioners, we should be live on
Ready?
YouTube.
We've got, you ready to go?
I think so. Yep.
All right, welcome. Welcome everyone to Planning Commission. Tonight, March 7th, North Logan City Planning Commission. We're glad to see you here. We will begin with a pledge by Gavin and a prayer by me.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our Father in heaven, we are grateful to be able to be here tonight in this Planning Commission meeting. We are thankful, Heavenly Father, for our good community, for the good people who live here and for the good things that they do. We pray that Thy Spirit can be with us tonight, that we can discuss things in an appropriate and a smart and a kind manner, that we can work through things at a good pace and be able to have guidance as we try to make good decisions for our city. We are grateful for the moisture that our city has received, that our county and our state has received. We thank Thee for this blessing. And thank Thee for all the other blessings that we have been blessed with, for the opportunity to live in such a good place. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Could we have someone make a motion to adopt the agenda for tonight?
So moved. Seconded.
Okay, it's been moved by Gavin and seconded by Heron. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, great. And we need to approve the minutes for our last planning commission meeting on February 22nd. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to look through those. We need a motion. All right, and a second.
Seconded.
Okay, it's been moved by Heather and seconded by Heron to approve the meetings for planning commission meetings, February 22nd, 2024. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. All right, let's move on. Any follow-up issues from our last meeting, Scott?
I just wanted to let you guys know, last night at City Council, we had those two subdivisions that were before you at your last meeting move forward. So that was the 2850 North 2nd West Commercial Subdivision. That's the one that we're creating the lot for the Rush Fund Complex. That went to City Council for their preliminary plat and development plan and was approved last night. So that project will now go to a final plat and a construction document phase, which is more technical documents that is reviewed internally. So that won't be coming back to the Planning Commission for additional review. That's kind of on to the next final step before recording and construction will commence. And if everything goes smoothly, they anticipate breaking ground, as soon as weather permits. So that's where that project is. The other subdivision on 1950 North, First East, that's that commercial subdivision behind Main Street, between Main and First East for the Rocky Mountain Power substation. That was a concept plan that went to the City Council last night and was approved as proposed. The one condition the Planning Commission had recommended is that we verify legal access is being provided to that middle lot. And the applicant actually responded and said, "Yep, hey, here's the information you're looking for. Those easements are anticipated to be included on that preliminary plat." So we'll see that again when it comes back to the Planning Commission, but that is the intent, is that middle lot does have an easement being granted in its favor specifically for access. So we'll see that probably in the coming weeks or months on preliminary plat and development plan. That's the next step for that subdivision. So one other thing that was on the council agenda last night was the city's water master plan and water model. That's been a project that's housed kind of under our Public Works Department. They've been working with a consultant to study our existing water system, but also to anticipate the future demand and how and what we need to do to prepare for water production, water storage, water distribution, and our overall water system. And so that was adopted by our council last night, and I think it might be a good time to bring that to Planning Commission just for an overview, so you understand the ins and outs of our water system, what that looks like in the future. I think that might help inform, on our general plan discussions going forward as well. So I think that's all I needed to follow up with you guys on from our last items and what was on council last night.
Great.
Scott, a question.
Yep.
Do we have a plan in the city in order to go through and replace old lines that have been there for 70, 80, 100 years?
I don't know that I can speak to that with a lot of educated responses. I know that we have obviously capital improvement plans and we have, when they break, we replace them, but I'm not sure the scheduling at which we replace them without them failing first. So we can look into it and get you some more information. I'm sure that
Okay.
there's more to it than I know about. So,
All right, very good. Thank you.
yep.
Thank you, Scott. Let's move on to item number 1. Scott, you want to walk us through that one?
Now, this is a fairly simple conditional use permit. It's an application for short-term rental. This is actually a newer topic that will come to the Planning Commission. As we worked through this last year, we made a policy decision to change it from just a plain permitted use where they just get a business license and they can start renting their property on a short-term basis. We said, let's just take one quick look at it before we issue a permit. And so this is our first application under that new policy where we have a conditional use permit requirement. We know a lot of folks don't take this step to come and get a permit. A lot of them just kind of throw their property up and they're not problematic. We don't really see a lot of them becoming a problem. Every once in a while, we'll get a complaint, but this is our first application formally being submitted to us for a conditional use of a short-term rental in a townhome down in our city center adjacent zone. So this is just off of 4th East, so it's 350 East, 256 North, in a 3-bedroom townhome. The zoning there, like I'd mentioned, city center adjacent, so it's kind of in our city center area where we anticipate having more development.
Scott, do you need to put it up there for
Yes,
people?
thank you for the reminder. So when we went through last year and
sure.
discussed some of the requirements that we should have for all short-term rentals, we have a fairly simple list. One of them is, hey, make an application, show us your parking. Let's make sure that you guys are aware that there's, a noise issue sometimes with short-term rentals. We'll take a look at occupancy, a couple of quick inspections as part of the business license process, and making sure that they pay their taxes and fees. So on this particular application, we know it's a 3-bedroom townhome, and based on the parking requirements, if it's going to be a short-term rental where the primary occupants remain in the home, then there needs to be at least one additional parking space in order to use any portion of the home for a short-term rental purpose. But if there's not an intention of residing in the home and renting out a portion, then presumably the parking for the residence is available for all of those occupants. So what we know about this property is that there's a 2-car garage and then there's guest parking throughout the community. And the parking is a component that could limit occupancy if there's not adequate parking to allow for the full usage of the occupancy allowance, which, if you remember, our occupancy is capped at 2 people per bedroom plus 4. So in this property with 3 bedrooms, that would be 2 in each bedroom. So 6 plus 4 could be up to 10 if they have the parking for it. But in this situation, they have a 2-car garage and then a little bit of guest parking that is first come, first serve. And the intention per the application was that they would limit their occupancy to 6. So based on their parking availability, it would equate out to a maximum occupancy of between 5 and 6 if we were to use a guest parking spot throughout the community. So one of the conditions that you'll see in the staff report is we say, yeah, it sounds like we need to limit occupancy. We can't give it a full 10-person max because there's not adequate on-site parking. But presumably there is, a guest space in the community that could be used. So the request for 6 as a maximum occupancy seems reasonable, and that's one of those conditions that we go ahead and add that occupancy limit at 6. Okay. Additionally, if somebody wants to short-term rent, they have to come in and get a home-based business license. which is basically verifying that they're registering that business with the state. They're paying the applicable taxes for transient occupancy tax, and then that gets remitted back to the city from the state. So that's one of those conditions of approval, is to make sure that they have that home-based business license. Okay. And I think that that's really the crux of this type of a review, is making sure we know what the occupancy is, and making sure we know what the parking is, making sure that they go and get that business license. And I've kind of summarized that in the staff report in those suggested conditions of approval. You guys have any questions or have any details you want to go over?
Sure.
What is the definition? Anything shorter than a 30-day lease. So if it's a long-term rental, the definition is anything on a lease longer than 30 days. So if it's a lease shorter than 30 days, then we would call that short-term. Now, most short-term rentals that we're familiar with are for a couple days, maybe a week, maybe up to 2 weeks at a time. But the definition is capped at 30. Yeah, it's like a Airbnb. Uh-huh.
Aaron?
Scott, question on my hang up, of course, is parking. If they're gonna have 6 rentals, I would assume that each one is going to have a car. I think that they ought to have room enough for 6 cars in their property to park off street.
That was my concern, parking. I drove around the complex and there's extra parking. There's not a lot of extra parking though, except there's a field out there. I don't know. So that was one of the conditions I was concerned about.
So we have the ordinance that
Yes,
we're trying to judge to the ordinance. And so the ordinance says that you've got 3. So if you have 2 parking spaces, that means your maximum occupancy could be 5. If you just have the 2 on the site.
so you've got 2 plus 1, right?
So
For
correct.
that, and then since there's 6, there's 2 more. They need 2 more, right?
No, so the way
One
that
more?
it works is with 2 parking spaces, you can have an occupancy of 5. So we're assuming
So-
that they'll be able to use one of those community parking spaces to get that maximum of 6. That's basically 2 people
So
per
just one
bedroom.
more. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
okay.
Yeah, so we can't say you need to have 6 spots because you
No.
have 6 people, because
No,
it's already
no.
right here. The
Yeah.
map, so.
The only concern is, and I'm okay with that, but that's 4th East and all the parking that's up above. You know, if Teresa were here, that would be a big thing for her to worry about. So it's just one, they just need one more.
They don't need necessarily a space unless, for example, we're not comfortable with them using the interior community parking as any part of their occupancy allowance.
I'm okay with that. But
So how many parking stalls are there in the evening?
I don't know. It
In-
depends. It's a first come, first served basis. So it depends on how many folks are visiting other units in that complex.
Now, is this going to be for family or individuals?
It could be to whoever wants to rent the
Whoever wants
property.
to?
Mhm.
So
go ahead, Kevin.
the other, I mean, as I looked at this and I went to the county GIS system, and there are no driveways. There's like a shared alleyway to the garages, and so there really is nowhere else to park but those first come, first served. Do we know how many spaces of that there is?
I don't know. It's actually a development that is still in construction. They're done with their most recent phase. There's going to be another phase where additional parking will be added, but for now, the first phases are nearing completion. There's a few, I think, certificates of occupancy that are lingering, but the next phase is actually a multifamily phase with commercial, and from everything we've heard, they're not planning to move forward with that anytime soon because there's a commercial component and they're not sure that the market supports the commercial development at this time. So there's a high likelihood that this project will kind of sit as is for the time being, and those parking spaces that have been added for the guests of these first couple of phases will be what is available.
I should have counted them. I usually count the parking spaces, but I didn't count. That's the only concern. There's not a lot, but they're there. And yes, they can't park behind their garage because there's no space.
Yeah.
This can't turn out like Old Farm up on campus where they're parking all over the place,
Yeah.
you know?
Something to think about. This kind of goes back to Commissioner Payne's comment. Our ordinance allows by right up to 5 people as an occupancy based on
Yeah.
their existing parking. So really, it's just, if we think that adding one more to allow for 2 folks per bedroom is over what is reasonable. I didn't initially have a concern because I knew there could be some parking, but I also think this can be actively managed by the applicant and saying, look, this property is limited to 2 parking spaces. And if you want to rent this property, don't bring more than 2 vehicles that can fit in the garage.
And I
That-
think
that's
that's
something they can manage.
I think that's good. I know that's happened to, on other places in Logan. They've just said, yeah, you can have 6 people here, but only 5 cars.
Right.
So,
And this is not intended to be.
Right. I don't think students could afford to rent this as a short-term rental. I mean, it's one of those things where, yeah, a student's going to find something long-term.
I
Yeah.
think it's just important for us as a commission to address the parking
Yeah.
because it's a big deal.
Yep.
And I'm okay with it as it is. I just want to make sure it's all out there in the open and we're talking about it. So if we have no other concerns,
I
Aaron?
have one, Scott, just, I don't know whether you want to consider this a clerical thing there on that first paragraph under the decision type. You've got approve on that last sentence. Is that any? You want to approve that, or do we just want to approve it one time?
I'm sorry. I was having a hard time hearing you here.
Oh, first page, down there was decision type.
Mhm.
Last sentence, it says approve with conditions of. So I'm just wondering, do we need both approves? Can we get rid of one of them?
I think it's saying you can approve, or you can approve with conditions, or you can deny.
Okay,
There's 3.
Correct.
okay. I misunderstood.
so I think, are we ready to, Gavin?
Yeah, I move that we approve the conditional use permit for short-term rental to residents on the CCA zone and be granted with the conditions listed and the findings from the staff recommendation.
Do you have a second?
Okay.
Yes?
Yeah.
All right. It's been moved and seconded that we approve this with the conditions stated by the staff. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, commissioners.
Okay, let's go on to item number 2.
Okay, so we talked about this last meeting, and I've got to be fully upfront with you guys. I have been extremely busy this last week and a half, and I have not had enough time to get into this to feel like we have a lot to discuss. However, I have started to study the topic, and I'm starting to wrap my head around, what I think would need to happen. I do have a phone call out to our attorney to verify some assumptions. But I don't have red lines for us to review in this meeting. I did want to, I guess, share my initial thoughts, and this is a model ordinance out of New Mexico where they took a stab at this after the Supreme Court had made their ruling saying that most signage ordinances are infringing on First Amendment rights. And the way that they organized theirs was by zone. So right now, the way that we organize our signage ordinance is by sign type. So we say, is it a business sign? Is it a political sign? Is it a temporary event sign? Is it a wall sign? Is it a business standalone offsite sign? And the way that I think that some communities went about this was basically just saying what size of sign, like what composition of sign is allowed in various zones. So I said in a commercial zone, we'll allow you to have a freestanding sign, totally content neutral. They don't say anything about content or what can be on that sign. So they limit it to the form factor, the shape, the illumination, and that way they can kind of get more specific as to how big of signs do we allow in like a commercial zone and how big of signs do we allow on buildings that are in an industrial zone. But then when we get to the residential zones, we say, we don't allow for large signs, illuminated signs. All we allow for is temporary signs of 2 feet by 3 feet, and they can only be there for a maximum of X number of days. So you don't even get into the topic of whether it is a political sign or a sign, advertising worship services or open houses like real estate signs or
Or
garage
basketball
sales,
camp.
right? And so as I was reading these ordinances, like that makes sense because they've taken all the content that could be, implied out of their ordinance and they just said, in this area, we don't want signs bigger than this size or in this location because we can also limit on location. And that made sense. I was like, okay, I'm starting to understand that. But unfortunately, that requires us to take our ordinance and totally regurgitate it upside down from what we have it as now. But the way that our attorney's email made it sound like is it could be a lot more surgical and it doesn't need a whole lot. We can fine tune this. And so that's why I want to just verify some assumptions with our attorney, make sure I'm on the right track before I start diving too deep into something and using time unnecessarily. So that's kind of where my head has been at the last couple of weeks. What's interesting is every spring, February, March, I always think, hey, we're okay as far as like staff time and availability, but inevitably, what happens is the phone rings off the hook and we've got folks asking zoning questions left and right, asking about fencing questions because they're gearing up for spring, summer projects. They're ready for the sun to shine and hey, I want to build a shed this year, and I want to gear up for that. I want to build a fence, what are my setbacks? And so I have just endless voicemails and things like that I'm trying to weave in, but it makes it hard to put your mind into something like this and be efficient with your time. So that's where we're at on this particular project. We'll keep poking at it, but there's also a lot of other things vying for time. And I think we'll fit this in as time allows because we've got bigger projects we're also working on. So do you have any questions about kind of this topic?
Got
Go ahead.
Yeah, so one thing I saw was, if you say signs can only be this big in residential, then they put 20 signs. And so what I've seen done in another location was that there was a total signage square foot available as well.
Yeah.
So you could put up 3 signs maybe during a political season, right? But
Mhm.
not 12 or.
Yeah, and this example ordinance, if you want to read through this when you get a minute, this ordinance that I found, they do have a limit on number. So in a residential area, you're not allowed to have any more than 3 temporary signs, and you can't have it for longer than 60 days. And I think that's appropriate. We can limit the number and the square footage based on what we think is reasonable and appropriate. So in political season, they may have multiple candidates at the federal, state, and local level that they want to support, and so we'll probably want to allow them to have a decent amount. But at the same time, we want to mitigate the clutter and just having a whole yard chock full of random signs. So no, I think that's something we'll look into. I think that we also have a desire to update our signage ordinance from an aesthetics perspective. And that's going to be a bigger task, a lot more analytical thought to see what is the aesthetic we're trying to go for and how do we apply that uniformly, going forward. So that's not the intent of this project. We're not trying to dive that deep into this. We're trying to address a particular concern that was raised, which I think does have some merit, but at the same time, it's not super time sensitive. So we'll keep poking at this as time allows. But my initial thought is we might need to take our approach of regulating by sign type and regulate by zone and by permanent and temporary, and then just kind of get a little bit more detailed as to, the sizes of signs that are allowed in different zoning classifications. I think that might be the approach. Unless our attorney says, no, don't worry about it. Just take out all the content related language that you have. So you can still call it a business sign, just don't say what it can be on that sign. So we'll see. I think that's where I want some clarification before we go too deep on it.
Good.
Okay.
Okay.
But yeah, if you guys want to read through this and kind of wrap your head around how this community addressed the topic, then happy reading. It's a lot of fun.
Great. Okay.
Okay.
Everybody ready to move on? Let's go on to, let's go on to number 3, Scott. Work session.
Yeah.
Just a point of clarification. I mean, I've been doing this a long time and I wanted to be sure. I wasn't totally specifically sure when Tracy as the alternate would participate or vote. And I wasn't sure if it was when there was only, he was needed as a quorum or when someone's missing, and essentially that's what we're doing. So if one person is out, you replace that person. I mean.
Right.
We'll replace 3 people, but.
Yeah.
So it's not just when they're informed, but it will be when anyone is out, so tonight you are voting. Member. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marie.
And I can clarify a little bit further, as I read the bylaws, our alternate is free to participate in discussion and ask questions and have dialogue and follow the topics as any other commissioner would. But they're not a voting member unless you're filling in a seat for an absentee. So that's just a point of clarification for everybody.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Marie and Scott.
Yep.
Okay, number 3.
All right, guys, this is a topic that the city initiated because we find that there's a need for it. And I actually have realized that we have needed this ever since I started, because this is a topic that a lot of communities have tackled in their own way, but North Logan hasn't specifically addressed up to this point. And I think that it can create some contention with some developable land that hasn't been platted or subdivided as would traditionally require. So I've compiled a few notes on this. I just want to introduce the topic so you can kind of start thinking about this as we go through. But before we can really discuss it, I think we do need to go through a little bit of an education process, just so everybody kind of understands the legalities behind what we consider to be a lot or a developable parcel. This kind of goes all the way back to the impetus of entitlements. What allows for somebody to build on property? So we're going to kind of educate you guys on this real quick, and then I'll introduce kind of what the issue is and some steps that we need to take to address the issue. Okay. So I wanted to just put some notes down. This is all from the copy pasted from the state code. Okay. So the state defines a lot as a tract of land, regardless of any label, that is created by and shown on a subdivision plat that's been recorded in the office of the county recorder. Now, what you'll kind of hear, if you're really attuned to it, is people will throw around a tract, a parcel, a lot, a quarter, a section of land, the back 40, however they want to describe their property. They're not interchangeable as much as you might think they are. There's actually, specific definitions, and it can be easy to mix them up. So let's just keep in our mind, a lot has been subdivided by a plat and recorded. That is a lot. Okay. And when a lot has been created and a subdivision has been recorded, it means that it's gone through the city's review process. It means that the zoning is accurate. It means that they have the correct utility connections so that it can be sold to a buyer as being developable, fully entitled, ready to be granted a building permit. Okay. Whereas a parcel, this is the next definition, means any real property that is not a lot. So it's kind of, this is raw land. It hasn't been platted in a subdivision. It's a parcel of land. Okay. And so when we're looking at our land use map or our parcel map, let me go there real quick. You'll see that there's a lot of lines, and a lot of them are either parcels or subdivided lots. And we have really good mapping. This is amazing. This didn't exist, 10, 15 years ago in the detail that we have. This is our most valuable tool as far as planning and viewing property. So I just turned on our subdivision layer. This is a layer that the county GIS department has created based on all the subdivision plats that have been recorded throughout the county. And you can see not all property has been subdivided through a subdivision plat. But you'll notice that as we zoom in, we have development on parcels that are not subdivided lots. So you can kind of see here we have some homes that have been built. And it's because a lot of times in the past, the state hasn't always required subdivision by plat. And so they've allowed subdivision by meets and bounds description on a deed. So a surveyor goes out, measures land, writes up a legal description on a deed. They record it with the recorder's office, and that creates a little parcel that has not been divided by a subdivision plat, but just by a survey and a deed. And state code changes over time, and in the past, a lot of folks would do that. But what is required by the state today under existing definitions is that any let me go down here. I'm going to skip down a little bit. So there's a section of code. This is State Code 10-9A-603. Is that a plat is required when land is subdivided. That is the default requirement for splitting a plan for development purposes. So nowadays, when people want to take raw land, split it up and sell it off, they have to go through a subdivision platting process, which is usually governed by a local municipality's subdivision ordinance. We have an ordinance that specifies how they go through this process and create a plat that then can be recorded with the recorder's office to create these multiple lots that can then be sold and developed on. Okay. Now there's a couple of exemptions. State code does exempt some divisions of land because it's not intended to be developed on, like ag parcels is one of the biggest ones where you can split it up or you can add land to an ag parcel that's meant to be farmed, not meant to be developed, but just for transfer of ownership purposes. But for the most part, land is to be subdivided by a plat. Now, there is a carve out in state code that says that a municipality can enact an ordinance for what we call a minor subdivision, where if you're subdividing land, small scale, no more than 10 lots is the cap under state code, then you may be able to do it via meets and bounds description. So a surveyor going out, creating individual legal descriptions, individual deeds, and then recording those as a way of splitting up the property. But under state code, if a municipality has an ordinance allowing for a minor subdivision, there's still a list of items that have to be done in order to take that route. And when you look at those, let me go down here. I'm going to zoom out a minute because I got to get some context. Okay, exemptions. Go. Okay, so let's just say that a municipality has adopted an ordinance that allows for a minor subdivision via meets and bounds. Then the applicant would have to go through a process that includes sorry, it's hard for me to, I'm very visual, so when I see it, I recognize it. Let me find that language. This is the language that governs just regular subdivision plats and the process that's taken. Sorry, guys, I'm having a hard time seeing it, but in summary, what it does is it requires the applicant to go through a survey process. So have to go have a private land surveyor go and survey the land. They have to do certain improvements that would otherwise be required of a platting subdivision. So that's, you know, street frontage improvements, dedication, road extensions, those types of things. And essentially what, as I read through it, the process is not all that or dissimilar from platting via subdivision plat. And so it would basically take the same amount of time and effort to go through a minor subdivision process without a plat as it would to go through this minor subdivision meets and bounds to record a subdivision. The language is in here. And if I find it, I'll come back to it. But long story short, the default method that the state requires every vacant piece of land to divide for development purposes is through the platting process. And that's governed by a local municipality subdivision ordinance, which we have. So why I'm kind of going through this top to bottom to help you guys understand how raw land then becomes developable is because we have a lot of parcels in town that are or could be considered raw land, can become developable, but we need to define what is required to go through our subdivision ordinance and what may be considered grandfathered, as in it existed at a time previous to our requirements or our first adopted subdivision ordinance and our zoning requirements, because some of these parcels have been around for a very long time, haven't changed. They've probably changed ownership multiple times, but haven't been modified. And so they were created in a way that would be legal to be divided back in the historical time point that they were created. So I kind of pulled an example so we can look at one kind of in practice here. And let's get this parcel number here.
So I just want to make sure I understood what you said. So that the property existed at the time, or that
In its current configuration, if it hasn't been changed since a point in time that it was required to go through a plating process, then presumably it was done legally at the time of its original creation. So let me show you this. This may help
Okay.
to make more sense. Okay, so this is a vacant parcel on 17th North. Okay, so if we look at this, we know it's somewhere in the region of 2.6 acres. Here's the legal description. This is just a meets and bounds description that it's actually referencing the original Logan Farm Survey, which was done a very long time ago. But what I'm looking at is I'm going to go down. We have some records from the county that denote specific timestamps. So we have a 1970 recorder's plat, we have a 78, and we have a 2006. So we know that the city's subdivision ordinance was adopted back in the early 60s, and our zoning ordinance was adopted even earlier than that in the 50s. But just so that we kind of look at a historical image, this is actually the same parcel back in the 70s as it is today, as in they haven't split it up and tried to sell it off and in little chunks, which happens. And so when we look at this, we could say, well, it existed in its current form and configuration back in the 70s. This might be a parcel we could say could be considered grandfathered, or some communities call them lots of record, because they were created before a time when the city had a requirement that they go through a subdivision process. So now let's just hypothetically say this has existed since the 40s, previous to our subdivision and our zoning ordinance. And we say, look, this was created at a point in time that, it was before we had specific regulations or rules to direct how they would do this. And so we would say, look, it's grandfathered, but if it is grandfathered, how do we allow for it to become developable? What improvements need to be done to this raw land in order for us to be able to issue a building permit? And that's where the gray area exists, and why we see that there's an issue with the way that our current language governs these historical parcels. Okay. Some communities have already addressed this topic. For example, Cache County, what they ended up doing is they said, look, we know that there's a lot of parcels that haven't changed, and we know that the ordinances and regulations have changed over time. But it also is a matter of, do we have adequate record keeping to be able to do historical research and determine if a piece of property can be considered grandfathered? Yes or no. And they basically drew a line in the sand 2006. As early as 2006, they said, we're going to say anything that was pre-existing before 2006 is a parcel that is a legal parcel for development purposes. Other communities, I worked in Weber County, and they had a 1962 line in the sand, and they had adequate records keeping in order to go and do some historical research and determine if a parcel was in its exact form and configuration at that point in time. And communities also have a process to formally review a parcel and say it does meet this definition as of this point in time. And here's a letter indicating that the status is that it is in fact a historical parcel, lot of record, or grandfathered lot, whatever term we want to use. It all means that it was created legally whenever it was created. Okay. So North Logan City doesn't have a line drawn in the sand. We don't have that in our ordinance to say, here's when we would consider a parcel to be a lot of record. I'll just keep saying lot of record because I think that's the best terminology to say that it's a grandfathered lot. Nor do we have really good language indicating what should be done on a parcel in order to become developable. We know at a minimum they got to get water and sewer, right? But we also want to make sure if they are going to develop that we would be able to exact certain improvements like curb gutter sidewalk or dedication of right of way so we can widen the street in front of their property per our plans, our master transportation plans. And then we can say, okay, go through this process and we'll give you a building permit. We do have one section of code that does, and we've been using this as the section, actually I have it right here in the notes. So this is 12C 120. And the way that it is drafted is it's reasonably adequate, but it has some issues. So basically it says any lot or parcel that is not part of an approved subdivision for the purposes of this section shall be interpreted as a parcel. So right away in this first sentence, we're already mixing terms lot or parcel. We need to clean that up. Then it goes on, it says all development of residential parcels, including those that existed as a parcel prior to the time when the city initially implemented zoning or subdivision ordinances or parcels divided since that time, whether through the subdivision process or not, shall be required to complete and provide for certain improvements. The required improvements are as follows. So it gives a very basic list to say we need to verify and let's try to get some street dedication. We need to get some utility easements. We need to record a survey with the county. And we want to make sure that at least power is put underground, not above ground. And those are the minimum requirements that we have if they were to try to argue that they're a historical parcel. Now, some additional language that's a little bit troubling to me is where it says all development of residential parcels, including those that existed as a parcel prior to when the city had initially implemented zoning and subdivision ordinances. So here, or parcels divided since that time. It's like, well, no, because they should have gone through the process. They should have gone through the subdivision process, right? So we're basically saying that maybe everything is grandfathered and that nobody has to go through the subdivision process, which is absolutely not the case because that's, in contradiction to state requirements that new subdivisions be platted. So there's some improvements we need to do because we've had some of these questions arise where we've had some of these historical parcels and they want to say, hey, I think that this predates any of your requirements. And so, maybe we need to talk about if it's grandfathered, which is common practice in the development world, but typically a community has language that addresses that situation, which we have some, but it's not great.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So this is in the case of a parcel that say existed from 1940 and they would like to build on that parcel, not to divide it in any way. Right?
Correct.
This one, they want to build a residence or
Yes.
something according to the zone they're in.
Yep.
Okay.
So let's just say that this owner said, hey, I want to build a home on this. I'm not splitting it up. I'm not going to subdivide. I just want to plunk a home right down in the middle of it. Yes, surely I have enough acreage. I have enough frontage. It meets all the today's zoning requirements. Can I just pull a building permit? And that's a reasonable assumption. However, we have requirements in our existing subdivision ordinance to exact like trail dedication. We had kind of talked about some of these things that typically are required at the time of development, but it's hard for us to exact those items when we don't have good standards in our ordinance to classify this as such.
So what type of actions would disqualify, say I had a property in 1940, what kind of things would disqualify it from being grandfathered? That I had split it, I had put a fence down the center, that I had, what type of, that I had put a building on it? I mean, what kind of things would ungrandfather it?
So let's just say that this parcel was created in 1940, just for hypotheticals. And let's say in 1985, they split it right down the middle and they sold a chunk to another owner and they kept the half for themselves, but nobody built anything. We would look at that and say, hey guys, we did have a subdivision ordinance in place in, the 60s.
Okay.
And we had a zoning ordinance in place and, that wasn't followed. And so that was technically an illegal division. that should have gone through our process in order to grant approvals at that time. And so we'd say, because it has changed and it doesn't appear in its original configuration, that no, it is not grandfathered. And in order to move forward with development on those two parcels, we would say, but they can become developable. You just need to go through our subdivision ordinance. You know, the process that is laid out for every other non-grandfathered parcel. So that's where they would produce a subdivision plat, even if they're not dividing any of the land anymore, they're just platting it, which is basically taking those parcels as they exist, drawing it on a plat map. And then we can ask for certain things like dedication of right of way on their frontage, easements for utilities. Maybe there's a trail, like a master plan trail, that we need to get an easement for. And then they go through the review process as everybody else does. So they're just not grandfathered, and they can't just come and pull a building permit with those little standards that we have. They need to go through the process as it exists today.
That one. So if somebody who owned that parcel wanted to put a house on it today,
Mhm.
would we require that they subdivide with a single lot, do a plat map, and then pull a building permit, or what would be required today?
So this is a section of code that most clearly addresses in its imperfect form. It basically says you need to go get a survey and get that
Right.
survey recorded with the county. If there is a requirement for street dedication, we'll have you dedicate that, but via separate instrument. So basically, have a separate instrument that they dedicate to the city, that right of way. We'll require them to dedicate utility easements along their property boundaries to allow those private utility companies and also the city to provide those utilities, and that they put all of their power underground. That's as far as we've got to work with.
And this is a draft, or this is in code?
This is in code now.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. So that's that. I mean, it's not nothing, but it certainly isn't as clear as I would hope it would be. Another example that we had come up a little while ago, and I kind of scratched my head on this a bit and kind of realized, yeah, maybe we need to address this sooner than later, is we have a historical property right here. Nope. Right here. This piece here, this has existed for a very long time. And they wanted to basically take this home and scrape the site clean and build a new home in its place. Typically in most ordinances that I've read through, if they want to maintain their property, do an addition, change out their siding, repair their roof, we would say, great, go for it. But if they're redeveloping, basically starting over, that's kind of that junction where the city can say, okay, now if you're wanting to completely redevelop the property, then you need to bring it up to current standards, which allows us to say, hey, we actually have a requirement to get this canal trail easement provided to the city. We also have a frontage that hasn't been improved, and a link in our sidewalk network that could be connected if it were to be redeveloped. And so I kind of scratched my head on this and said, well, you know what, we don't have great language. It's presumably grandfathered, but at the same time, this is a gray area. And ultimately we said, look, if we had more robust language, it would most certainly meet the definition of a grandfathered lot, because the home's been there since the 20s and the property lines haven't changed. And so it hasn't transgressed our zoning ordinances in any way to make it substandard or illegal. But it is where they're scraping the site and starting over, which, that's an instance where, okay, this property has had its lifespan and now it's redeveloping. And that's where the city would say, okay, now's the time to go ahead and take care of some of these planned items if we're going to fully redevelop the property.
So you're saying it's grandfather, you don't kind of do all.
Correct. Yeah. Well, if they're fully redeveloping, that's another question, because
That's the question. That's
Yeah.
the gray area. Huh?
correct, because we wouldn't make them plat it again if it's grandfathered. But if they're going through a full redevelopment process, then maybe we could, change our standards to say, okay, if you are going to bulldoze the site and start over, now it's time to get a curb gutter sidewalk.
And that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
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 So a building permit is based upon a plan and adequate engineering and. So if you take down a building, the building permit no longer describes the building that was permitted.
You're starting at zero. So most.
Right, I guess what I'm saying is if they were to go through and scrape, they would need to get a new building permit.
Correct.
And to get a building permit on now what is empty land.
We would want to say, is this a legal lot?
Right.
So sometimes we'll have appraisers reach out and say, is this a rebuildable lot? And sometimes there's insurance companies that will reach out and say, would you reissue a building permit on this property? And what they're asking is this a legal conforming lot, or is it legal non-conforming? And that's where we would say, well, let me see if this were raw land, would we reissue a building permit today? Yes or no? Is it a legal buildable lot? And that's where our language kind of falls short because we haven't defined what is a historic parcel that could be reissued a building permit. Yep.
So what will be before us some point is clarification of this language.
We need to draw a line in the sand. We need to say, what date are we saying anything that predates is a legal grandfathered lot of record, whatever term we want to use. I think lot of record makes sense. And if it is, then what are the standards that they have to follow in order to get a building permit? So if we're not taking them through our subdivision ordinance that spells out those items, then what are we taking them through? And my initial thought is we need to be cognizant of when our original ordinances were adopted. So we'll get those dates clarified, but also what records do we have available that are sufficient that if somebody were to come and ask us, we could say, here's where you're going to go find this information.
So,
We'd like to take care of it sooner than later, but I'm not asking for necessarily the planning commission to do that as a homework assignment. I want to introduce this and I'll bring a proposal to the planning commission to review and consider sooner than later, just because it has been an issue on and off for the last couple of months. We've had a few things come through where it's like, well, we wish we had better clarity on this, but we don't. Like this one, for example, we ended up issuing that building permit. And we did not get that trail easement as maybe we had hoped, but we did have them commit to doing some improvements along the frontage, not full curb gutter sidewalk, but there were some improvements that they would be doing there. So
oh, go ahead, Aaron.
Go ahead, and then I'll ask.
So just all those dates you talked about, you need to know before we set a date.
yeah. Correct. Well, and I think we have a pretty good idea. We know that the subdivision ordinance was in the 60s, early 60s. We think it's 1963. And we know that the zoning was in the 50s. I just want to go and grab those dates, find those meeting minutes and say, exactly this is when we had requirements. And then from there, we'll go and say, what is the best set of records that we can then put a line in the sand? And based on the county record system, I think this 1970 record set is probably our closest date. Now we could do something, like the county and go all the way up to 2006, but I don't necessarily think that that's necessary. I think there's adequate records in the 70s that we can rely upon. Something else that's problematic and why this is an issue is because somebody can engage a private surveyor. They can say, hey, I want to chunk off an acre and give it to my kids. And they can do that. They can have it surveyed. They can create a deed with that legal description of that acre that they want to chunk off. They can take it down to the recorder's office and record it without anybody batting an eye. They can do it and not know that they're creating an illegal parcel that can't be developed. So for example, if they're in a 5-acre zone and they create a 1-acre parcel, that 1 acre can never be developable because it's not big enough to meet current zoning. That can happen in any zoning classification. If you're at a 1/4 acre and you go just slightly below 1/4, you're now substandard. And if you were to have a house fire and you were to scrape the site and start over, we would say, well, this is technically an illegal lot, it doesn't meet zoning. And they would have to reconstitute that lot, as in go and ask for that land back from the neighbor that they gave it to, or whatever may have happened. And this has been an issue for a while, and planners have discussed this with recorders. And the recorders say, look, it's not our place to review anything for land use applicability. We're just recording documents. We are document recorders. We are not here to verify the validity of a document, and we're kind of saying, and so then you go back to the professional land surveyors and say, why are you, doing this for your clients if it could potentially create an illegal scenario? And anyways, this is a loophole that has not been closed. And so we end up with some of these parcels that have been divided without any oversight from the land use authority, without going through a subdivision ordinance. And they are created, they are sold. People buy them thinking they are developable and they're not. And they realize I have raw land. I have to take it through this process, which is very expensive, to be subdivided with utility connections and frontage improvements and road widenings and those types of things. And it creates issues. We are dealing with a lawsuit in Sound because of something very similar. So it's good for us to define what it is, define the standards that apply if it is in fact what it is, and then have a clear path forward. Another thought I just left my mind. When we define this, we want to put the onus back on the owner to go do that research. We'll give them the definition of what is and what is not, before or after that line, and say, go to a title company, do this historic research and bring us back the evidence that it could meet this definition. And in this language, what we'll do is we'll say, if you want to apply for a certificate of legal, lot of record status, or whatever we want to call that, you go do that homework, you bring it back to us, we'll review it. And if we find that it meets that language, then we'll issue a certificate based on the current legal definition. And we'll say, okay, this is a grandfathered lot. You can use that to memorialize the fact that the city has recognized it as such. That will help them to sell the property. It will help them to say, okay, well, now I know what I need to do if I want to pursue a building permit in the years to come. I can sit on it for now, but at least I know that the city has recognized it as a land use authority, and it's not this questionable parcel of, is it buildable? Is it not buildable? Do I need to put a lot of effort into it or not? So that's an idea. We want to put the onus back on the owner, go do the homework, come back to us, and then we'll verify and we'll issue you with some correspondence that you can keep with your records.
There was, let's put it this way, one day it was there, the next day it was gone. A little white house there on 1800 North, and I think it was about 6th East on that south northwest corner. And I'm just wondering, right east of the Stake Center.
17th North, and how far?
1800 North.
Oh, 1800 North.
18.
It's across from the,
How far east did you say?
I think it's around 6th East, right across, right east of the Stake Center.
Oh,
it's,
why am my bearings are off? Oh, this stakes. Okay, sorry.
no,
Okay, now go right up there. It is right there.
Oh, this one.
That's right there.
Gotcha. Yeah.
There was a little white house there. One day it was there.
Yeah.
The next day it was gone. And the next day the hole was filled in. Now, where are they on that? Are they still back to zero or is that?
That's a very good question. This is very applicable. So this is this is a home that was derelict, and it actually went through code enforcement. We had our code enforcement officer reach out to the owners who recently acquired the property. And they want to redevelop, they plan to redevelop, but the home was unsafe and they were requested to, remediate the site, which they did. They bulldozed it and now it's just kind of a vacant patch of land. It is zoned, I believe it's 1/4 acre. Is it 110 here? Yep. So, I mean, they have development potential, but it's really not entitled for anything at the moment because it's scraped. So they'll need to take it through the plating process in order to build more than one home. Now, if it existed, previous to, let's actually look and see if it was there on the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was probably in the
been-
40s or 50s.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think it's this one
Little
right here.
house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it may be more than one. Yeah, so that's kind of what they would do. They would go back and verify these plat maps and see, is it in the same configuration as before? Now, there is some language out there that says if it is the same as it was before, or if it has gotten bigger, less non-conforming, that we would also consider that to be a legal lot because they haven't divided it. So they haven't created more developability and they haven't shrinking it down from the original size. Some people have allowed that to be considered a grandfathered lot because it hasn't become more non-conforming if it ever was
So if
non-conforming.
I owned two and I recorded them together,
Yeah,
some people include that as grandfather.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where we could be specific in our definition and what we would allow to have changed over time to retain that grandfathered status. Yep.
Scott, is there any way they can do that for the old Danes house? Get it condemned and torn down?
I think we can easily say it's been condemned.
A lot.
We're pursuing that. Yeah. Yep.
I'd like to see it gone.
Yeah. So what I'll be doing over the next, when I get time is I'll be looking at some examples of communities that have addressed this. And we'll kind of pick what works best for us. We'll put something into our code to kind of close this gap and clarify, what our
Yeah.
definition is. Okay. Fun stuff. You guys have any questions or anything you don't quite understand you want to clarify?
Just need to work on it in our heads. Do
Yeah. Yep.
you have a question, Aaron? Northern Land Inc. No, that corner is right, where that little house is, where the arrow is.
This owner lives in Providence. I know that.
It's what?
This owner, this Northern Land LLC, they live in Providence. They've actually been good to work with. I mean, they went out and remediated the site when we asked them to, so that's nice of them. I do know that they plan to develop it. I think they're just waiting for more advantageous market conditions before they do anything. Yep.
So that's not.
That's where we need to define it. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Scott, we.
That's it on this. Yeah. I mean, I have work to do and I'll bring some more back to you in the future. So.
Okay. So we're on to number 4, right?
Yes. Okay. As an update, so the general plan, what we're working on at the moment is we're refining our surveys. There's a couple of public surveys we're sending out as part of the general plan, and they address specific topics like land use, transportation, parks and recreation, general direction of the community as a whole. And so we've been working on finalizing what questions we want to ask, how we want to ask those questions, what information we're wanting to receive back from the public. And we have some work to do to polish those further. Our hope is to get those first surveys out next week if possible. And then what our plan is we want to issue 2 surveys at a time. Initially, we were thinking maybe we'll do 1 per week over the next 4 weeks. We had some feedback that might just kind of create some survey fatigue where some folks might see one survey, forget about it, see another one, and then just kind of get behind the sticks and then feel like they can't catch up. And so our thought is let's just hit them with 2 for the first week and then 2 with the second week and see if we can get a good response with that approach. Following the survey effort, we'll take all that information. Our consultant will basically consolidate, look for different themes. They'll distill that down into digestible information, and then our next step is to convene the Planning Commission and City Council in a joint work session. So that's next month on the 11th. It's a Planning Commission night. It'll be kind of integrated with our Planning Commission meeting, but yeah, so if we've got. Correct.
And this is what you had us make comments on.
Correct.
Yeah.
So if we can stick to our timeline, we'll have 2 surveys go out next week. We'll have 2 surveys go out the week of the 18th, and that'll give us 2 weeks to take that information and make some useful information out of it. That's the tentative plan. So we've kind of put that up as we'd like to try to keep pushing this forward. But if we feel like we're going too quick, we'll slow down. If we feel like we're not ready, we'll slow down. But we'll see how that goes. Right now, we're planning on that to be our meeting on the 11th.
Mhm.
Yep.
Scott, how are those going to be dispersed?
So we're
Mail
gonna,
or email?
we're gonna have a paper copy and we're gonna have a digital copy. So the digital copy will be advertised through all of our traditional dissemination channels. So we have the Parlent system, which is a text message based system. We have listservs for both our recreation department and our library department, where you've got thousands of households on those, and they go out through email. We'll have a paper copy that we'll look to distribute to specific neighborhoods, like some of those 55 plus communities where they have single meters, where we have a hard time getting their phone numbers for text message purposes. And we'll also make it available for folks who want to stop by the offices and pick up a paper copy as well. So it'll be mobile friendly, so you can do it on your phone, you can do it on your computer. It'll be friendly in that regard. But we'll try to get the net cast as wide as possible. Okay.
Good.
So that's the next step, general plan wise. So we'll see if we can stick to that schedule, and we'll keep you guys in the loop.
All right. Great. Thank you.
One question, when do we get to the new building? When I'm not freezing to death or burning it?
We're hoping to be in sometime around May. We'll have a formal ribbon cutting, maybe June. I don't know.
Then they'll have air conditioning going for you. Yeah.
We're hopeful.
Great.
Here, ready to try my hook.
All right. Any more staff business discussion?
Yeah. Two upcoming events. One we've discussed in the past, the Utah Land Use Institute Spring Conference, Friday, March 22nd. So that's from 8:30 till 4. It's an online. I know Commissioner Walker would like to attend, so we'll get him signed up. I know and you're not able to attend. We're actually going to take your registration and convert it over, so we don't have to go through like a refund process. We'll just
Thank you.
swap
Thank
it
you.
over.
Thank you.
There's another opportunity.
That's great. Thank you, Tracy.
So the same entity, Utah Land Use Institute, they're holding a planning commission practice and procedures. So it's very specific to planning commission procedures. It's a free training, but it's only in person. And it's down on the Wasatch Front. It is at Clearfield City Hall. So it's at 7 p.m. If you guys want to go down to an in-person event, a free event, you're welcome to. It's very specific to planning commissioners, but there's not an online option, unfortunately. So
And when is that?
that is Monday, April 8th at 7 p.m. in Clearfield.
Okay.
If you'd like to do that, if you want to make it part of the date night trip down south, let me know.
Yeah, it's exciting, guys.
Yep. And then lastly, one of the things the city is putting together is what we call almost like a Facebook. It's a city directory. It's an internal document for us internally to know who's who, put a name to a face, have some contact information. And we are needing to grab a headshot from anybody who would like to have their face in the Facebook. It's like an old school Facebook, right?
Yeah.
If you'd like to.
We're dying to.
This is all internal. This is just for, for us to know who's who, So anyways, if you'd like to send over a headshot, we'll throw you in the Facebook.
Will we just email it to you? How do you want it? Text?
It's the same one. Yeah.
Just, yeah.
There you go. Jason.
Just
I think
text
the interns may have sent out an email and asked you to do that, but just
it.
a
Yeah, then
reminder.
Take your picture on your phone. and
Looks
you
like, yeah, we got a couple.
Oh,
Thanks, guys.
So,
So, just a
yeah,
reminder.
can- So do you want it
Take your
texted
pictures
to who, what? How do we
Just email it over to me.
email it over to you?
Yeah, and I'll get it where it needs to go.
Okay, I hate these things. But look at Teresa
your
and
picture.
Tracy.
Good job, you guys.
Wow.
Yeah, I'll just take all of our pictures by the flag up here and then I'll send them.
There you go. We got a problem solver.
There you go.
Done and
Let's
done.
do it
Lens clean. Well,
Efficient.
yeah, we'll get this.
Okay.
before I do my makeover, so I look good. That's right.
If I don't do it now, I'll never remember. So
We don't do it now, I won't know how, so.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but after we adjourn. we
Yeah,
Can do
yeah.
this.
I move we
Okay.
adjourn.
Okay, wait. All right, any other business, Scott, we need to discuss?
No, our next meeting's on the 21st, so
Okay.
2 weeks from today.
And not be 21st. Oh,
Okay,
Can we all make a nod here on the 21st and we'll have a forum and we'll be.
You're not going to be at the next
I'm
one.
gonna be gone, yeah.
I will too. I'll be gone.
okay.
Gavin, you get to head up this
I'm-
meeting.
Are you gonna be gone?
No, I am gone the next week. 21st, I'll be here.
Okay.
Okay. So it sounds
Um,
like we'll maybe be okay. So
So don't have too much excitement going on.
yeah, I don't anticipate I don't have anything in my hopper, regular action items. So if anything, it would be work session items for us to look at.
Okay. All right. Then I think we are ready to have a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?